We are live.
All right. Well, welcome to everyone. I know we've already been talking just a little bit, but welcome to any online listeners that we have to the Licensure Subcommittee meeting. So it may be helpful. I don't know, Alexandra, if you know everybody or if everyone else knows everybody. I think we do, but just real quick, if we go ahead and do introductions, we'll know for sure that everybody is familiar. I am Chris Blanton. I am currently Assistant Superintendent. Human Resources is really my main role with Watauga County Schools. Prior to that, I was the principal at Watauga High School for 6 years, and then prior to that, I was with Cleveland County Schools in a number of different roles. And so just glad to be here and very thankful to be doing this work with Ms. Hoskins and the rest of it. So I guess next we can go down the list on the PowerPoint. I guess, Alexandra, if you want to introduce yourself next.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Alexandra Hoskins. I am the Executive Director for Systems Coherence and Strategic Planning for the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. And I am very glad to be able to meet everybody.
Shannon, if you want to do your introduction next.
Okay, I'm Shannon Patton. I teach mathematics at Davie County High School in Davie County outside of the Winston-Salem area. I've been here for 8 or 9 years. Before that, I was a lecturer at NC State in the math education program in the STEM department and worked with student teachers and the student teaching program there. And also taught in Wake County for a little while, went to grad school and did some projects at University of Georgia. So,
Go Dogs. And I don't believe, unless Superintendent has joined us, Superintendent Truitt has joined us since we started. I don't believe she's here. And then Dr. Bullock is not, but we do have Hank Whittington who's joined in her place. So.
Hey everybody, I'm Hank Whittington. I'm the Dean for the College of Education at Lenore-Ryan University and glad to be with you this afternoon.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for attending. And Dr. Evans is in charge of the meeting, or she is the host for the meeting, I guess is what maybe a better way to say it. And Kim, is Tom joining us today or no? Do we have any other DPI staff members?
No, everyone is double booked.
Okay, just making sure. I didn't want to miss anybody in this. So welcome to everyone. Thanks again for your time to be here. This is an important thing that we're doing today. Really the outline for what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about the timeline real quick, and then Alexandra is going to talk about the session law that goes along with the work that we're doing and what we're tasked to do. And then after that, she will talk to us about the options that we have as a committee, and then we'll really spend the majority of our time after we understand the law discussing kind of what we want to do and where we think we want to go with this recommendation. So you can see the timeline on the screen. Today is obviously our first meeting, January the 18th, and then we will try to meet again in about a month in February. Hopefully that 9 to 10 a.m. time slot works for everybody that's here. And then March 21st, we'll do that. And then our hope is to have a recommendation to PEPSC by our PEPSC April meeting. And Kim, you correct me if I'm wrong. I took some notes when we met to discuss this, but if, and I'm not saying that we will, but if we have our work complete, it is possible to make a recommendation to PEPSC prior to that, or would we just, it is?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly from the notes that I had in our original meeting. So if we feel like we're in a good place to where we can do that prior to April, we will certainly do so. And but again, we have until April to make the recommendation. So everyone feel good about the timeline?
I'd ask if those times are firm or if they could be. I'm teaching until 2 o'clock. I have fourth period planning, so either I need to get somebody to cover my class or not attend the meeting or something like that.
Tim, so I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody. I can be more flexible probably than you can, Ms. Hoskins, but as far as my schedule goes, and so I would be willing to adjust that. Kim, I don't know how the room plays into it, and if we have to have them at a.
I would have to check and see the
Okay.
availability, and also the live streaming availability. So,
Gotcha.
but Ms. Patton, we understand if you're not able to make a meeting, if we're not able to move those. We don't want to necessarily inconvenience you. But these times and dates were also centered around availability of the co-chairs.
Okay, just thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, with that being said, Ms. Hoskins, I think we are ready to move on to the session law slides.
Great. I'm ready to talk about it.
All right.
And I'm sorry about I don't know what's going on with my videos, so I apologize for not having a picture. So we are charged as a subcommittee to look at this particular portion of Session Law 2017-189 that talks about the grade point average for participants into, or for acceptance into an educator preparation program. And the charge has two different parts, which we have color coded into two different shades of blue. The first part talks about appropriate courses for calculation of individual and cohort grade point averages for admission to EPPs, which may account for prior degrees attained, type of license, and areas of licensure. So that individual and cohort grade point average we're going to talk about on the next slide after we finish with this one. The darker blue section talks about the commission considering which grade point average, either the grade point average in the content courses relevant to the licensure area or the cumulative grade point average, should be used as being most appropriate for clinical residency students. So the language that's important to unpack in that second sentence is to make sure that we have a common understanding of what clinical residency means according to the statute. So we have one charge, which is to determine the appropriate courses. And within that charge of determining appropriate courses, the statute kind of outlines two options in the calculation of grade point average. The first one being the content courses, and the second option being the cumulative grade point. So let's dig into that grade point average a little bit more. So the law goes on to be really specific about individuals being accepted into an EPP with a 2.7 grade point average. They have to have earned a grade point average of at least 2.7 as an individual. As a cohort, the statute maintains that the cohort must have a minimum cohort grade point average of at least 3.0. So statutorily, we are confined to the 2.7 and the 3.0. What is not identified right now in statute is what courses can be used to constitute that grade point average. So that's what our charge is as a subcommittee, is to identify those courses that would be used to calculate that 2.7 and then obviously impact the cohort grade point average of a 3.0. Any questions at this point? Ms. Patton, is that clear? Okay, good. All right, just making sure. All right, so next thing we want to talk about then are the definition of the clinical residency. So the statute talks about clinical residency being a clinical resident, someone who already holds a bachelor's degree, who is enrolled in an EPP, and is employed by a school district and supervised by that EPP in partial fulfillment of the training requirements. So they already have a bachelor's degree and they're working in a school district while going through their EPP and being supervised by the representative of the program that they are completing. it goes on, the statute goes on to talk about, again, holding that bachelor's degree, enrolled in the EPP, and being employed. Good, thank you, Kim, you're doing a great job. Any questions about the clinical residency piece? You good? So as a subcommittee, we basically have two different decisions that we need to make in order to make our recommendation to the full commission to take to the state board. The first decision is we need to recommend how that GPA will be calculated, whether it's calculated based on courses applicable to the licensure content area, which will include implications for initial professional licensure, which I'll talk about in just a second, or recommend using the overall cumulative GPA. So the first part of the law that talks about the coursework that would be acceptable for entrance into an EPP would apply to residency programs as well as initial professional licensure programs, which is where things get a little potentially complicated around identifying the coursework or the calculation of the GPA for those different programs. The second piece that is implied is the qualifying degree piece. So the qualifying degree might be that a person wants to come into an EPP and they have a bachelor's degree and they have a master's degree, and now they want to go through an EPP in order to obtain teacher licensure. We will need to make a recommendation of whether to use only an all bachelor's degrees, or if we want to recommend the use of the highest applicable degree that a person has attained. Slightly different nuance to what the charge is that we will need to make explicit. So that's a brief overview of what our charge is, some of the language around GPA and clinical resident, and then our two basic decision points are the licensure content courses versus the overall GPA, and the use of the bachelor's degree versus the use of the highest applicable degree obtained. So, having said that, we need to have some further discussion, and so Dr. Blanton is going to help us have that conversation.
Sure. And this is because we only have a small number of people in the meeting today, it might be best to just do this a little more informally. So we know that we have two decisions to make, and we know that we essentially have two options for each of those decisions. And we have an hour allotted this, and I'm not saying that we need to take an hour or have to take an hour, but we do have about 45 minutes left today. I think the easiest thing to do and the best thing to do would be to take questions first, just to make sure that everybody's clear on what we're trying to do, and then just anybody who wants to, because it is such a small group, throw out some ideas and let's talk about the pros and cons of both of the options. And Kim, are you, do I need to take notes? Are you planning to take those?
I was planning on taking notes.
Okay, gotcha.
It doesn't matter who wants to take notes, but I will be writing the questions or any main ideas on the slide, and then I'll send that out to everyone afterwards.
Thanks. And I forgot to do this before we jump into that. Kim, thanks for all of your help with this. For those of y'all who may or may not know, Kim is very good at helping us put the PowerPoints together, get the information that we need to get on there, and then just helping us stay organized. So thanks for doing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and so that being said, questions, and then let's start talking about the pros and cons of, we can start with option one after we answer any questions. And Shannon, it may be, well, really anybody, but if you have any questions that we can answer or clarify, then we'll be glad to do that. If not, let's talk about decision one, which is the GPA calculation. And just as a refresher, from what Alexander said. So we have the decision one GPA calculation, and do we want to do that based on the courses that are applicable to the licensure content area, or use the overall GPA? What are the pros and cons of both of those options? And Hank, being from an EPP, we're probably going to rely on you to give us certainly your opinion from Lenore Ryan, but I imagine you've had some discussions with other people in EPPs to talk through that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I think we've all kind of struggled with this for the residency side of things. For the traditional route, it's kind of an odd question if we're talking about traditional, because most of them haven't done any content work or very little content work at the time when they're admitted to a school of education. For residency, they obviously are coming with their bachelor's degree. This is totally my opinion, shared by some others, but I would love the option of being able to consider either or, whichever is the highest of the two, given our current need for teachers in the school systems. The con to that is in specific fields where we might get a little bit creative with which courses we count towards a particular discipline. We may get somebody in a classroom that doesn't have enough content knowledge to be able to do the job effectively. But it's always tough, because if you'll look at somebody, if you were looking at a content area and somebody coming from NC State who had a chemistry degree and maybe it was a 2.5, but you know that that's a really tough program, and 2.5 is not a bad GPA for that particular program, as opposed to, you know, I won't disparage any other disciplines, but I mean, some that have a 2.5, you would say, wow, that might not be the best score there. So it's nice to have some flexibility, and I don't know if we have the option or not to recommend using an either or kind of a deal, or if it has to be one or the other at this point. That's kind of where we look at it.
You said disparage, and you were I was wondering where you were going to go. You were going to go institution.
No, I would never do that. Get myself in trouble there.
Well played. Kim, I don't know the answer to that question. And some things we talk about, Alexander and I probably aren't going to know the answer to. In our discussions leading up to today, we talked about having the two decisions and having the two options for each decision, but that is not one that I guess taking the higher of the two there is not one that we discussed. Is that a possibility? And really, I guess we're making a recommendation out of this subcommittee to PEPSC. So is it possible to make that recommendation?
Well, it says here that the commission shall consider which grade point average, either the grade point average in the content courses relevant to the licensure area or the cumulative grade point average, would be most appropriate for clinical residency students. It's not saying that there's a choice, that you can use both. I know that here it's saying clinical residency students, but it seems like it's either or. And then the first sentence is saying that the appropriate courses to be used for calculation of individual and cohort grade point averages, so you would use the same method for cohort and then also for individual, because that and is in there. That's how I interpret it.
I've wondered, though, if there is any wiggle room with the phrase that says prior degrees attained, type of license, and areas of licensure. Like, if we're supposed to be taking those three factors into account, then is there the option?
I think there's an option as far as deciding using those factors.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's I like that thought process, though, Hank. It sounds like we're going to need to go with one or the other. Just out of curiosity, though, and I know that what you just stated was your opinion. You said it was shared by some others. I do think that it's important for us to consider what EPPs, might want. So, where do you think, knowing that we need to pick one or the other one, where do you think most EPPs are going to fall? Just out of curiosity.
I really, it's such a tough question, depending on which programs or which licensure areas you support at your university. And it's also, my first inclination would be to use the cumulative, because you might have more courses to create an average that would give you a higher average possibly than just a 24-hour set of content courses. But we definitely run into people who have, say, a 2.6 GPA overall, and we can pull out their content and see that they just aced their content while they were there. So it's, from person to person, is so different. The good thing is that we have the Praxis 2 to kind of fall back on to help us with their content knowledge for some of those that maybe don't have it, but do have the cumulative GPA. But for those people who are on the borderline or on that line, it's tough. And we're kind of in the same situation that I think the P12 people are right now, in that we're all trying our hardest to recruit people into our programs. So we don't want to put up any barriers that would keep people from getting into teacher ed and getting into the schools. So it's tough there. But for my recommendation, if I had to choose one of those two, I would go with the overall GPA, just to give them a better chance of having more grades to fall back on. Now, I would love to see the legislature put a rule in place that could say, at the discretion of the university and the sponsoring or the employing LEA, that if you can review a transcript, cumulative GPA doesn't meet, but you can look and see that they had, a horrible semester, one semester. Second semester, freshman year, my aunt died. I had to go and take care of somebody. I really flubbed it up, but I got back in and I finished my degree, but it really hurt my GPA overall. It would be nice to have the flexibility to be able to make some of those decisions, because I think that could hurt some people that would be really fine teachers in the schools. But I would lean towards the cumulative if I had to go one way or the other.
Thanks for that. I think that's helpful. Shannon, any thoughts on that?
Well, the mathematician in me leans toward the cumulative too, just because, like he said, the being able to average more courses in, but also thinking too, depending on what area somebody wants licensed in, what if they only have a couple initial courses in that licensure content area? Like, for example, we know there's a great need for special education teachers. Like, what if you have somebody who has a degree in chemistry, for example, but who'd really like to come and work with special ed kids who need help in math and sciences? Then what kind of courses do you look at for them for their content area GPA? If they're wanting to get a license in special education. So I feel like there'd be limiting factors with some of those licensure content area GPAs, whereas the overall would open things up a little more.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a perspective that I had not considered. I was really kind of leaning toward the licensure content area, because people tend to do better in classes where they have a genuine interest. And if they want to go out and become a teacher in something, then it would make sense that they would have done well in the courses related to that content area. And so that might actually result in a higher calculation for those courses. But I love the point of the chemistry major who wants to teach special education, and may need to, maybe missing those required hours to qualify for that area. And so in that point, the limiting factor really does become, like the barrier actually gets removed by using the cumulative as opposed to placing it.
And I guess before I heard Hank and Shannon talk, my thought was kind of like what Alexandra just said, is maybe a level of maturity. I know a lot of kids who have gone through school and freshman year for whatever reason, whether it was because of an aunt or because they made poor decisions or, just being away from home for the first time or whatever the case was, that first year or two, maybe their GPA was not quite what it needed to be, but then they get into their major and maybe it's higher. But that I don't have any, I don't have anything to base that on other than just casual observation. So I think what y'all are saying about the total number of courses being greater and being able to average that in may make sense.
I mean, I would also say, going along with what Shannon said about special ed, the same is true for elementary. It's really difficult to figure out what is a content elementary class. So we'll have a lot of psychology students who decide at the end, wow, I don't know what I'm going to do with this career. I'd love to be an elementary teacher. So I can go through and pull out like some developmental psychs that would count towards it. But in terms of real content classes for elementary ed, it's very hard to determine what that would be and how to give them any credit for that. And I would say that that's probably our biggest program. Well, it is the biggest set of students across the state. Our teachers across the state would be our K-6 teachers. So I don't know. I think we'd be putting ourselves in a little bit of a bind if we just did the content area GPA. Although, wow, I would think our legislators, if they had the chance to consider it, would say, yeah, it would make perfect sense to decide which one's the best one for the student, for the school system, as opposed to having to choose one. But I get where we are right now.
So, hey, is it okay if I ask Dr. Weddington a question?
You absolutely can.
So, Dr. Weddington, do you go case-by-case basis at your EPP for admissions cohort and individual GPAs?
No, we have a rule in place right now where we just look at cumulative GPA because that's done the most good for the most people. I think we've had a couple of exceptions along the way, but yeah, that's the way we do it right now. And we don't have elementary ed as a residency license program, so we're not in the same kind of position that a lot of institutions are who have to make some of those calls.
I see. I just wondered if you had something in practice right now that you were doing for the either or, if you already had that flexibility at Lenore-Rhine or not.
Yeah, no, we don't right now. I would love to keep as much flexibility for the EPPs and for the LEAs as possible, just because we need a pipeline right now. We don't need any more barriers to keeping people out of this profession. So anything that we can do to make that more possible is great.
Thank you.
Good question, good answer. I couldn't agree with that statement more. I mean, I think where you started this whole conversation with is the pipeline and needing to have as many people eligible to teach in our schools as possible is noted, and I, again, couldn't agree more.
I have a question, and I apologize if it's not a good question, but the overlap between Decision 1 and Decision 2, like where Decision 2 says recommend use of the bachelor's degree GPA, is that also the overall GPA that we're referring to in Decision number 1?
In the way I see it is that we have to make decision number 1, and then we would rely on that decision to inform the way decision 2 would be recommended.
Does that make sense? And that I would say that's the way that I understand it too. I guess, Kim, are we thinking about that correctly? based on your understanding and based on the law?
I know that during our prep meeting, those were 2 points that we really focused on. It doesn't specifically say in here, as far as I can see, that there has to be a certain degree grade point average. It was more around the cumulative versus the courses relevant to the licensure area for the grade point average. Dr. Weddington, when you look at cumulative grade point average, are you looking at, I'm assuming, the bachelor's degree?
Yeah, I look at the bachelor's, but if somebody had a master's degree in a appropriate area, I would take that over the bachelor's degree if it was higher. Typically, people who've had some work experience or done advanced degrees, I trust that degree GPA a little bit more at that point. So somebody flubbed up 2.7 in their bachelor's, but had a 3.8 in their master's, I would accept the master's if it was a appropriate degree or a discipline.
I see. It does say which may account for prior degrees attained. So I think that's where Alexandra is focusing there.
The other question we have sometimes, and it's the same with test scores, although there's more clarity around that, is if I did a BA and graduated in 1989 with my BA in English, worked in some field for a while, went back and did another BA in something else in the mid 2000s, and then decide I want to be an English teacher. Is that degree still something that we should fall back on because it was so long ago, beyond like a 10-year period? So we do right now, because we don't want to keep anybody out, but it's always a question as to whether they have the most current content knowledge that we're going to be teaching in the public schools based on a degree that might be older and no professional development in that area between then and the time that they're trying to get a license.
But you have that flexibility to choose.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. That's something that I can double check and make sure that a particular degree doesn't have to be selected. Is that something that the group would like me to research?
I think it would be important to know.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if somebody came in with like a bachelor's and a master's. Do you pick one? Do you calculate the overall average? Do you take all the courses from both degrees and calculate all that together, or
Yes, the answer is yes. I think across the state, all of the above is being done right now. In fact, so much so that I know that there are institutions that will take a community college GPA, put it with the BA GPA, and try to come up with the overall 2.7, even though the community college GPA will not impact the GPA that they earned while they were at their BA degree granting institution.
And that's just because they're doing anything they can to try to make sure that the student's eligible to enroll in the program and to become a licensed educator in the state of North Carolina. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other thoughts or discussion? We've kind of gone into a little bit of decision 2 now, but just any other thoughts on decision 1 with the GPA calculation before we move completely into 2?
mine also, I mean, do you compare it all to the requirements that like in-service bachelor degree students have to do? Like, is there any kind of parallel as far as their GPAs to be able to student teach, for example, or anything like that? Or does that not, are those completely different?
The reason I would say that they're different is the majority of the students will apply to become admitted to the EPP at the end of their sophomore year. And so they typically just have general education courses and maybe a few content courses or a few education courses leading up into it. Then they jump into their fields that junior and senior year are hard and heavy. So we just don't have as much to go on there.
I think that's another argument for looking at the cumulative. If we only have 2 years of coursework to look at, right?
Sure, for the traditional track, I don't know how else we would do it except with the cumulative. Residency is where I think the question really hits. Because I have no idea how we would look at a content area GPA. I mean, they may only have 2 classes, and that would not be a real fair measure of their performance.
So what about decision 2 when we're talking about the qualifying degree? Use the bachelor's degree GPA, or if they have multiple, use the highest applicable degree GPA. And Kim, I don't, well, and maybe Hank, I don't know who this question would be directed to the most, but when we're saying applicable, is that defined anywhere, or is that just assumed that EPPs are, they know that? That's not anything that we need to wrestle with. I'm asking.
So I'll answer that I'm the one who added the word applicable in there. And that was not part of statute.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So use the bachelor's degree or the highest GPA that they bring to the table. My thought would be, it kind of goes back to what Hank was saying in the beginning with decision 1. This does sound like maybe where we have either or, you know, an option to where we could say the highest with option 2 would give us the most flexibility, but that's just a thought.
I can also consult with legal and make sure that whatever degrees are being chosen in this case to calculate the cumulative, if that's what we decide on, or the subcommittee decides on for the GPA piece, to make sure that a particular degree does not need to be selected, that it could be flexible in that case.
I think that would be helpful.
Definitely do that.
I know you added the word applicable, but I and I don't know, it seems to me, so let's say somebody came out with a history degree, wants to teach history, had a 2.68, you know, as a history major, and then went back and did an MBA later so that they could work in the business industry, knock the top off of it, 4.0 student. Would it be fair to use the 4.0 GPA towards licensure for a history teacher at that point?
Yeah, I think that was what was in my head, was almost that exact example.
I think I could argue either side of that. I think that in a lot of ways, to me, it would make sense to use the history degree if that's what they were coming back to teach. However, that doesn't provide us with the most flexibility to get the most people in the program to eventually teach. think you could also say, back to what we were discussing earlier, you know, level of maturity or whatever the reason was, that, you know, maybe at the time of their life there was something that prevented them from performing as well as they did later when they went back to get their master's degree, even if it's not related to what they're going to be teaching. So I would, I guess I would lean more towards, and a lot of this has been shaped from hearing y'all talk about the first one, but I would lean more towards the use of the highest GPA degree, maybe even if it's not what we might consider applicable.
My initial thought was bachelor's or higher, but could that also be a 2-year degree GPA that is used?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. Does the
Well,
law,
within the definition of clinical resident is the requirement of a bachelor's degree.
So they'd have to have a bachelor's degree, but would that but could you go back to their 2-year degree if you're looking at GPAs? If they have both?
meaning they have a bachelor's degree, so they meet the requirements of the law for clinical residency, but they also had an associate's degree and using the GPA from the associate's degree. I think that's what you're saying. I just want to make sure I understand that correctly.
Yes. Because you do have some people who takes them a while to kind of find their direction, so they have potentially several degrees.
I don't know if we can make that recommendation, Kim. That might be another, unless you know, that may be another question that we ask the legal.
Yes, that would be another question to ask legal.
Okay, because just, I mean, I guess my lens from the job that I'm doing now, and really from what I was doing before, my lens is I would be in favor of what Shannon just said, if that allowed us to have more teachers in the profession. Because I think what she just said, they would meet the requirements for clinical residency, and if their GPA from an associate's degree was higher, then we take that. I would be in complete favor of that.
It sounds like that's the next step, is to consult legal, so I'll put that there.
Yeah, because I'm not in favor of doing anything that legal does not approve of. Any other thoughts on our second decision that we need to make? Again, I think it's fine if there's not and we finish 15 minutes early. I don't think that's a problem. So, but I certainly don't want to cut it off if we're not finished.
The last subcommittee finished 15 minutes early too.
Okay, so we'd be in good company. All right, are there any other next steps that we want to ask Dr. Evans to help us with? If not, I think I can speak on behalf of Alexandra, and I know I can speak on behalf of myself, that we appreciate y'all participating today and being a part of this, and hopefully we can make decisions that will be good for everyone. So thank you for your time, and we'll look at the times for the future meetings. I see you typing that now, and see if we can make some adjustments for Shannon, because I know that if we can, you would appreciate it. I think your kids would be better off for that if we can keep you in the classroom. I feel certain that that's the case, and I imagine your administration would be grateful too. So,
have colleagues who wouldn't want to come in and cover my class if they didn't have to.
That's also true. Well, definitely do.
Thank you.
Hey, Kim, are we just going to do that through, if we can make that work? So Shannon, I guess you have fourth block planning 2 o'clock. That time would be best for you. And so,
Yes.
So I can check for those same dates as long as you and Alexandra are available?
can I look, what was the next date? Let's see, I have it on my slides.
Here it is.
February 15th.
February the 15th. I can, if you give me just a second, I will look and see what we've got. I can do 2 o'clock that day.
You can? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Alexandra,
I can, yes, I can.
okay, awesome. I'll just have to check and see availability.
Okay. And do we need to check with Superintendent Truitt or Ann Bullock, or are we good to go if there's availability there?
No, I would just change it and then we can see if their schedules are adaptable. If not, then maybe we can still recruit Dr. Weddington.
Yeah, that'd be great. For us, I don't know. Maybe he feels the same way, I don't know.
And then what about March 21st?
That.
I am available.
Or, okay.
I can be available that day too.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Ms. Patton, for speaking up.
Thank you. I understand if I can't attend. I just felt like since there were so few on the subcommittee, I didn't want to not try to pull my weight if I could be there. So
Yes.
Good.
Yes, I appreciate it.
All right,
Thank
team.
you all.
Yeah, thank you very
you.
much. Hope you have a great rest of the day and a good end to the week.
Thank you.
thank you, you all too.
See you.
Bye.